This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the world. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/eyebrowcinema.
You can play all you like. You and I both know that I'm going to put you away because you can't help yourself. You can't stop.
This little speech comes from Riddler's Reform, an episode of Batman the Animated Series wherein supervillain the Riddler seemingly abandons his criminal pursuits to become a legitimate businessman. Batman isn't convinced, perhaps because this was not the first time one of his enemies had supposedly turned a new leaf.
But this time I'll reclaim my perch in high society as an upstanding bird.
Pass. Kitty's been staying in at night.
I don't know who has been duplicating my old crimes, but I can assure you, gentlemen, Poison Ivy is dead.
The villain reform storyline was in fact a popular premise for the writers, with 6 different episodes of the original series, Birds of a Feather, House and Garden, Catwalk, Riddler's Reform, Second Chance, and Harley's Holiday, each exploring the outcome of a supervillain attempting to go straight. And it's worth asking, why was this such a persistent episode type? It certainly wasn't because of a sincere optimism for rehabilitation. Spoiler alert, but none of these stories end with the villain conquering their demons and living a normal life. What these episodes did offer were new storytelling opportunities, and the means to re-examine Batman's iconic rogues gallery. This video will be an exploration of the villain reform episode, and why it was so essential to Batman the Animated Series.
I've learned my lesson. Never again.
The most immediate benefit of the villain reform story is it allowed the writers to take familiar characters and place them in new situations. It's telling that the first of these episodes was made more than halfway through the series, and that the remaining 5 were among the last 20 episodes ever made. After growing accustomed to seeing villains presented a certain way, it's thrilling just to see them adapt to a different scenario. The Penguin fancies himself not just as a criminal, but as a cosmopolitan, someone with the sophistication to appreciate fine works of art and great beauty. Compared to Batman's other villains, he's positively debonair. But Birds of a Feather asks, what would happen if you actually put that character within high society? Wealthy socialites Veronica Vreeland and Pierce Chapman decide to ingratiate the Penguin within their circles. Not out of any sincere interest in him, but as a joke for their own amusement. Big she's all that energy.
Am I a bet? Am I a fucking bet?
Seeing how out of place and oblivious Penguin is among the social elite can be really funny, but it's also kind of sad. Oswald's desperate yearning for the approval and acceptance of the sophisticates he longs to be is tragic because they will never value or respect him. He's too crude in his manner, too grotesque in his appearance. This is what the villain reform story offered. Not just the novelty of seeing the Penguin share sardines with a wealthy heiress, or Poison Ivy play housewife, or Harley Quinn go on a shopping spree, but also a different kind of story. One that could approach the core aspects of a character from a new perspective. Which is not to say the villain reform episodes fundamentally transformed Batman's storytelling. An episode like House and Garden still revolves around traditional Poison Ivy tropes like poisoning wealthy men and plant-based experiments which verge on body horror. Catwalk still emphasizes Catwoman's skills as a thief. Second Chance, Harvey's predilection for crimes based on twos and dependence on his coin to make decisions. All of this was familiar, but the Reformation plotline repositioned that familiar material and made it feel new all over again. Sure, all of these episodes do eventually boil down to bad guy is doing a bad thing and Batman has to stop them, but the change in details and flavor invites a different perspective, sometimes literally. Where Batman is the de facto main character of the series, an episode like Birds of a Feather positions the Penguin as protagonist. It's his ambitions to enter high society that drives the plot, his emotional arc that serves as the basis of the story. We experience Penguin's defeat, disillusionment, aspirations, love, betrayal, and ultimate failure, all through his point of view. The narrative tension of Act 2 comes from knowing Oswald is being manipulated while he is himself oblivious. Even the first commercial break cliffhanger is rooted in the Penguin's safety, not Batman's. A similar structure is used for Catwalk and Harley's Holiday, with the villain as story protagonist and Batman as more of a side character. And for as much as I'm presenting the villain reform episode as a specific type, the template is a lot more malleable than you might think. Bad guy tries to reform is less a specific formula than it is a question. What would happen if this bad guy tried to reform? The answers can encompass a broad scope of genre, from sci-fi horror to brain-teasing puzzles to twisty crime narratives. Most of these stories have an overriding sense of heartbreak and sorrow, but there's space for humor too.
Well, this is hardly the style to which I am accustomed.
Glad you like it.
There's a lot of fish-out-of-water amusement in transposing these supervillains into more mundane settings. Harley's Holiday is a full-blown screwball comedy, complete with slapstick pratfalls and a madcap chase plot. The episode even plays like a parody of the other villain reform stories, where going straight never works and always escalates to absurd degrees of supervillainy. Harley even quotes the first villain reform episode in a comical bit of self-reflection.
I suppose it's true what they say. Society is to blame.
I tried to play by the rules, but no, they wouldn't let me go straight. Society is to blame.
Even the sincerity of the Reformation varies. The Riddler's legitimate business may have been a transparent ruse while he continued his robberies, but Penguin, Catwoman, and Harley Quinn really do make an effort to turn their life around. Second Chance and House and Garden are mysteries where the intent of the villains is left in doubt, and the solution is a lot more complicated than actually they're still evil. And the heart of these differences in tone, style, and intention are the villains themselves. The details of each story are sculpted around the central villain's personality and especially their desires. One of the core storytelling tenets in Batman the Animated Series is the development of the villain's motivations. To quote the series Bible, we insist that our writers put some thought into the logic of the villain's actions. Specifically, what does the villain want, and what do they plan to do when they get it? The central strength of the villain reform episode, then, is that no matter the story, the question immediately puts focus on interrogating character. To ask why a villain might want to reform is to ask, what does this person really want? Which brings me right back to this little gem from Riddler's Reform.
You can play all you like. You and I both know that I'm going to put you away because you can't help yourself. You can't stop.
What I love about this speech, and the episode as a whole, is how incisively it cuts to the core of who Edward Nygma is. The Riddler has achieved all the external rewards villains typically aspire to. Wealth, adoration, and perhaps most importantly, the recognition of his genius that had previously been denied him. But none of that matters, because Riddler's true motive is to demonstrate his own brilliance. His crimes have never been about material gain, but proving his intellectual superiority over his greedy boss who had previously screwed Nygma, and now over Batman, the only one capable of outsmarting the Riddler.
He's the only one worthy of the game!
Placing the character in a context where they have all the external rewards serves to crystallize how powerful internal motivations are. A similar stripping away of externals is seen in Catwalk. Previous Catwoman episodes depicted the character as an almost Poison Ivy-esque environmental activist, someone whose crimes were motivated by protecting and avenging abuses of animals, and cats especially. But this story opens on a Selina Kyle who's been forced to abandon all activities as Catwoman and doesn't have an activist mission to motivate her. And it's pure agony. Selina craves the thrill of danger, yearns for the intoxicating power of stealing. It's these desires, not an environmentalist slant, that ultimately motivate Selina to don the suit again. To underline the point, the episode climaxes with Catwoman throwing a stuffed animal trophy of an extinct cat into peril to save herself, essentially rejecting her earlier motivations. Helping animals is secondary to pursuing her own pleasures. This focus on interiority and desire is what gives the villain reform episode weight. Beyond the fun from seeing Poison Ivy play suburban housewife, the role also reflects her overwhelming urge to dominate and control men.
I meant it when I said I wanted a family that loves me. I just wanted it on my terms.
The Penguin fighting off some goons in an alley is not a mere subversion of expectations, but a dramatization of the gallant and sophisticated hero he'd like to believe himself to be. And while ostensibly centered on the villains, these episodes also reveal a great deal about Batman. The best of Batman's villains reflect some aspect of the hero's psychology, and each of these episodes foregrounds those parallels. That the Penguin is a grotesque figure who yearns to be seen as a sophisticate is mirrored in Bruce, effortlessly accepted by Gotham's elite, but ultimately more himself amidst the extreme personalities he clashes with. In Batman Returns terms,
I'm just jealous because I'm a genuine freak and you have to wear a mask.
You might be right.
and just as Bruce Wayne is really a persona which hides the true self of Batman, so too is Catwoman the authentic self of Selina Kyle. Poison Ivy's mutant children are these monstrous extensions of her plant experiments. But is that really so different from Batman, whose own surrogate son can't help but reflect the extremities of his surrogate father? Even with the possibility of removing the physical scars of Two-Face, Harvey cannot overcome the psychological traumas which have shaped him. Something Bruce should be able to relate to.
Why couldn't you save us, son?
Compulsion is in fact what unites all these characters. The reoccurring theme of the villain reform episode, in all its manifestations, is someone who wants to grow and change, but can't. Sometimes there's an external factor which precipitates this failure, but the deeper truth is that all of these characters are driven by profound obsessions that are not so easily abandoned. And what character embodies inability to get over an obsession better than Batman? Perhaps that's why the Dark Knight shows so much sympathy in these episodes. He's always suspicious of intentions, but it is also clear he's rooting for his enemies to be able to overcome their demons, and palpably disappointed when they can't. Even the zany antics of Harley's Holiday conclude with a tender moment of grace between hero and villain.
I had a bad day too, once.
This is the heart of the villain reform episode. These were less epic tales of heroes and villains than they were emotionally fraught explorations of character, of people trying their best to navigate who they are and what they want from life. And the series framed these explorations with a great deal of empathy. Acknowledging the Riddler's prison is one of his own making doesn't make his desperate cries any less harrowing, nor does Ivy's malice render her heartache any less painful. Plot and tone may vary, but the villain reform episode is ultimately a story of human desires, failings, and the shared humanity between Batman and his enemies. Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Mubi is a curated streaming service where you can watch some of the most beautiful and incredible works of cinema from around the world. Every day, Mubi premieres a new film. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. And these movies don't come from a faceless algorithm, but are hand-picked by actual human beings. It's like your own personal film festival, streaming anytime, anywhere. If, like me, you're the sort of person who delights in watching old Siskel and Ebert videos on YouTube, I would absolutely recommend Life Itself, Steve James's emotional and insightful documentary about the great writer and film critic Roger Ebert. And the best part, you can watch it and a whole host of amazing cinema for free right now. Just head to mubi.com/eyebrowcinema for a free 30 days. That's a whole month of great cinema for free.